So now the jar is in place, and then it is asking for some additional details like database. So what database we will be using? I can navigate to my RDS page, and if you'll see, and if you'll click here, it will give you all the details for your DB. So my DB name is simply CBADB. So I'll say CBADB, and then my username is CBA, and I'll just punch in my password, and then I'll have to give basically my endpoint. So endpoint, you can see it is present here. Instead of localhost, I will simply give my endpoint, and I can take off the port, and I can give my DB here, CBADB. Okay. So now instead of localhost, we will use this endpoint. Keep in mind, we'll use this endpoint for connectivity. So I have given that endpoint, and the port will stay the same, 3306, and DB I have given CBADB. Okay. So now either if you want to save the password, you can simply say save password, or now we will be doing a test connection if we are able to successfully connect to this MySQL instance. Say test connection. Yeah, it's taking quite a long. Okay, so we are unable to connect to it. It says com.mysql jdbc dot blah 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 communications link failure. Okay, so we are unable to connect. So if you remember that we discussed, remember what is the security group? So that was default VPC. So now we will have to configure our default VPC to allow connection. So what that means? So first of all, now go to services, inside or under network and content delivery, click VPC. So this networking and all we will be discussing in separate sessions. So just focus on the changes that we'll be making to make this work. And here click on security groups. So default. So this is the default that we gave in default security group. So herein I'll just expand a bit. So this is the default security group that was defined for our RDS. Inside here, click inbound rules, and herein you will have to say edit. So what will happen is when we are trying to connect it to RDS, so it is not allowing any inbound connections from our local. So we will have to configure inbound connections from our local system to access AWS RDS instance. So we will add a new rule. So how to do that? First of all, say add new rule. Choose MySQL Aurora from here. Port is 3306, which we are using here, 3306. That will stay as it is. And herein you will have to give in your public IP. So there are various websites from where you can know your IP. So keep in mind that you don't have to give the IP which is given in IP config under your when you just log into your command prompt. You can simply go to some websites that will give you a public IP. You can say IP Monkey is one of the websites. So you can go to ipmonkey.com. Here you go. So this is my address, IP address. So I can close this. I have the information. Just paste your address here and give /32. Okay, so this is the syntax. After this, you can simply say save. So now we are allowing inbound traffic. So if you are accessing AWS RDS service from this IP, it will allow connections on 3306 inbound rules. So that's why we have defined. Now we are asking AWS to allow connections from this IP using port 3306 to MySQL. So we are allowing the connections now. So this time communication failure error will not occur. We were getting communication failure error because we were not able to communicate to our AWS RDS. Now let's try and do test connection. Voila. Great. So we are able to ping successfully and we are connected to our MySQL instance. After this, you can simply say finish. Okay, so we have our CBADB up in place. On this new MySQL instance, we can open a new SQL scrapbook. So this provides us with a utility that is SQL scrapbook, wherein we can basically execute SQL queries. So herein we'll select our database. So we will select MySQL 5.1. Name is new MySQL only, that is our connection driver. And database is CBADB. So let's try and execute some queries. So we'll say create table employee is again, as we discussed, it is one of the most popular table. Yes, it is. So we'll say ID int, or we'll just take name varchar2. Let's try and execute it. I don't remember the syntax exactly. So it says you have an error in your SQL syntax. Check the manual. Okay, as I said, I don't remember the syntax exactly. So I think it's simply varchar. So let's, okay, great. So I think our table is created. So let's try and insert a row in this table. So I'll say insert into employee Rahul. Okay, so let's run it. Great. So now values are inserted. So let's try one select also. Select star from employee. I think it showed. So here are the results. So okay, so we are doing pretty good here. Okay, so now we fired up a MySQL instance or RDS instance, and we just filled in our IP on Amazon AWS so that it should allow connections on port 3306 using this IP for RDS. We have configured that, and we just fired up some simple SQL queries, of course, which I was unable to write. Yeah, I know. Okay, so this was it, and so I think that this was pretty much for our practical session in our AWS RDS. So I hope you will be able to launch and connect to your RDS. So whatever RDS you are choosing, the underlying database, that is Oracle or MySQL, and it will at least give you a kickstart so that if you want to develop some application after firing up a MySQL instance on AWS. So that was all about RDS, and I think this is all about the storage services that we'll cover in this AWS session, in basically all the AWS sessions. So we covered S3, we covered DynamoDB, we also covered RDS, and we covered a little bit about EBS also. So that was all about storage services, and we will also be bringing up sessions on networking and security groups, security and security groups also. And again, as we discussed in earlier sessions as well, we will also be trying to come up with a real world example so that you can get a good look and feel of how applications are made and deployed onto cloud. So that was all about from this tutorial. I will see you in the next session.